This is officially the halfway point. We've made it to our 8th Colossus. We're going to have to descend into more ruins. This time they have a little bit more of an arena feel to them. The feeling of descending downwards always makes the impending encounter feel a little more exciting. That even happened in the encounter with Barba. The Colossus we're going to encounter here is called Kuromori, which stands out because it's actually the first time we've really had any obvious Japanese influence on the names. Most of them tend to be Latin. Kuro means black, and Mori means forest, so the most literal translation would be Black Forest. That doesn't quite make sense, though. Supplementary material tends to call Kuromori something along the side of wall spider or shadow spider or something along those lines. And although Kuromori doesn't take the image of a spider, that makes a lot more sense once we see how Kuromori behaves. This time, half of the puzzle is actually getting to where Kuromori is. It's not too difficult, but it still gives us a little bit of time to get ready for the impending encounter. And here we are. When I say this area reminds me of an arena, it seems like a place where people really stood and watched what was happening down in the pits below. Maybe Kuromori existed as a beast that people had to fight. It's hard to say. A lot of the spaces we contextualize with not much meaning to them. There's a lot of bars here. You might contend that it's a prison. Perhaps it's a prison to keep Kuromori in, as we've sort of contemplated with other colossi. Kuromori is interesting, however, because Kuromori is one of the first colossi that has an explicit magical quality to it. Hydrus might have had that electric sort of defense mechanism, but Kuromori is actually the first that can shoot projectiles at us. So if I get Kuromori's attention, it will actually look up at me after scaling the wall, and hopefully I won't fall off. That would be terrible. But it will scale the wall, and it can actually spit projectiles at me. We don't necessarily want to let that happen though, but it is something it can do. So here we'll actually see it, just so I can show it off. It shoots off almost a poisonous cloud of magical mist that if we stand in for too long, we actually take a significant amount of damage, and it takes a while to dissipate. It's one of the first chances we get to see a Colossus really engage in magical behavior. In order to get Kuromori down, we have to sort of take all of the knowledge that we had from our fight with Quadratus. We understand that these glowing parts of a Colossus indicate some sort of weak point, and so now we need to get Kuromori down to our level. Or at least we need to knock it down from the wall, because otherwise we can't do any damage to it. It's hard for me to think of a lot of significance that Kuromori might have. The name stands out, but otherwise the encounter seems fairly basic. Most of the time, the creatures we encounter come with some sort of meaning. Avion had a strong symbolic meaning. Even the fight with Hydrus had a really strong meaning. Which actually reminds me, I said that the music in the Hydrus fight only plays during the Hydrus fight. It actually plays during the encounter with Avion. It tends to play anytime we encounter a passive creature. Meanwhile, a creature like Kuromori here is active. So the music reflects that. We have to understand that games are not just their systems or just their content, even though that's a really reductive way of breaking down games into a sort of separation that I don't think really exists. What I'm trying to say is that although the mechanics might put some sort of pressure on me and put me into a certain emotional state, I have to consider the whole picture. I have to look at things holistically. Even when I'm trying to decide what my symbols mean, and what the significance of certain areas are. I not only have to think about the level design of this spot, I need to consider the enemy design of Kuromori, I need to consider my own abilities and how I interact with Kuromori, and then I also need to consider other things like music and even lighting. All of these things can add up to meaning making. It's not just the mechanics that tell us something about the game, or necessarily about our enemies. It's the whole picture. And even though I'm focusing on things like ludic pressure, I don't want us to ever think that there's a large separation between certain aspects of games. Games are complete texts. Now that we've gotten Kuromori down, we just need to climb up and stab its weak point. An easier task than said. Hopefully we can jump on the tail. I think it might be flipping over. Kuromori is another design that's sort of about timing. Maybe not the same way that Hydrus was, but one of the largest things we have to deal with is actually moving down into the space after Kuromori falls. If I shoot both the weak points, it might flip over here, but that's not necessarily an assured thing. I really need it to climb up after me, and then I need to make it fall down, and then I need to make it down into that space quickly. Perhaps I could fall down, and hope that my health holds up, but that's a risky maneuver. A crazy thing to do would actually be to draw Kuromori up and then actually jump and do a stabbing jump into Kuromori's weak spot. This is something I've seen people do, and it really shows a mastery for the game mechanics, but it's sort of out of my league. As a halfway point, I enjoy that Kuromori does introduce these magical elements. I think that's important. It helps us understand the Colossi as not just things that contain maybe Dorman's soul, but they contain other powers as well, whether those things are granted by Dorman or not. Hopefully we'll get Kuromori this time. I was a little slow getting onto its back. And actually, we'll take the risk of falling down with it. Not a lot of damage there, so I'm feeling okay. And once Kuromori's on its back, it's relatively weak and easy for us to dispose of. Although it does have 2 sigils. And there we go. We're halfway through the game. 16 total Colossi, 8 of them down. Kuromori is also another design for a Colossus, rather, that emphasizes nature. It represents or looks something like a salamander. Although that natural image is sort of undercut by the fact that it can attack us with magical power. Still, if we want to follow the thread of destroying nature, now we're also destroying magic itself. Another sort of beautiful force that could be used for multiple things. Now that we're halfway through the game, it starts to do some interesting things. We get to see a vision of Mono waking up, so we have an understanding that our journey is making some form of progress. But it takes place behind this sort of granulated filter, and we draw away from it very quickly. It's possibly a vision that Wander is having. It's possibly a premonition put in his mind by Dorman. It could simply be a dream. But it is a space that's separated from the game world itself. The filter makes it clear that it's occurring in not what we would consider the game's reality. And even though we've reached that sort of magical halfway point, and we're going to dwell on Mono for a moment, our quest is going to continue very quickly. Although I want to note the use of strong music here. This is also the first time we see Wander physically touch Mono's body after placing it on the pedestal. Or at least, to the best of my recollection, it is the first. We don't dwell on the moment, though. Dorman sort of interrupts it and sends us back on our quest. We don't get to focus on our objective or the thing that we love. We have to worry about the journey that we have to take still. If we want to talk about the idea of obtrusive language, this moment with Dorman is probably one of the most obtrusive in the entire game. And immediately we're tossed back into action. But since we're at the halfway point, we're going to end today. This was a good session, and we'll go through the rest very soon. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for staying with me. Shadow of the Colossus is a fantastic game, and we still have plenty more to cover. I'll see you later.